Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the fourth edition of Warehousing Live, brought to you by India Warehousing Show. This is a special edition in partnership with Knight Frank India, who will be sharing key highlights of their annual publication, India Warehousing Market Report 2020. The report tracks the warehousing sector across 8 cities. This year reports also scans market beyond the top tier cities to include 22 secondary markets. To present the summary of the report, I request Rajni Sinha, Chief Economist and National Director, for Knight Frank India, to share the key pointers. Over to you.
Thank you, Akshita. So as Akshita said, I'll be taking you all through the highlights of our warehousing report, the main highlights. And in fact, many of our panelists have also given us their inputs for this report. So really looking forward to our panel discussion. So going back to the presentation, I'll request the team to start the presentation. Yeah, next. So India's logistics sector, if you look at the maturity curve, there has been a sharp move upwards by India. And if we look specifically at the warehousing sector, the warehousing sector has moved from more of godowns had in the past to a more organized form of warehousing. So post GST, this whole trend of consolidation and institutionalization has dramatically changed the contours of warehousing in India. So Indian warehousing is still way below the much more matured markets of China and US. But given the huge size of Indian economy and relatively low base of grade A warehousing stock in India, there's huge potential of growth going forward. Next. So this graph here shows the sharp jump in warehousing demand post 2017. In FY 2020, we have seen some moderation in warehousing demand. So the warehousing demand in FY 2020 has fallen by around 11%. And that's mainly because of slowdown in the economy. But even after taking that into account, if you see for the last 3 years, the warehousing demand has recorded a strong CAGR growth of around 44%. So now the warehousing sector has got hit by the COVID-19 crisis, but we feel the impact of COVID-19 crisis on the warehousing segment would be relatively less compared to other segments of the real estate sector. And we feel that the revival would be relatively faster given the indispensable nature of this segment. Next. So here we are looking at the breakup of city-wise transactions. And as you can see from this table, Mumbai emerges as the market with the highest CAGR growth in the last 3 years at around 70%. If you look at NCR, it emerges as the market with the highest warehousing transaction in FY 2020 at around 8.6 million square feet. And that's in spite of a YOY fall of around 32%. So broadly, as you can see from this table, most of the markets in the last 3 years have recorded very healthy CAGR growth. Next. If we look at the sector-wise breakup of warehousing demand, as you can see from this table, 3PL segment leads the warehousing demand with a share of around 36%, followed by e-commerce and manufacturing segment. Here it's important to note that the share of e-commerce has increased from around 14% in FY 2018 to around 23% in FY 2020. Now, if I look specifically at the performance of the different sectors in FY 2020, in FY 2020, we saw most of the sectors some moderation in demand, but the fall in demand was specifically sharp for the retail and FMCG segment. Next. So as you can see from this graph, e-commerce has been the driver for warehousing demand in the last 3 years. So in the last 3 years, warehousing demand from e-commerce segment has grown by a very healthy 55% CAGR. So this is higher than the 44% CAGR growth that we saw in overall warehousing demand. Going forward also, we remain very bullish on the e-commerce segment, and we feel that the e-commerce segment growth could get further accelerated by the COVID-19 crisis. Next. So the secondary markets, if we look at the secondary markets, the warehousing demand from secondary markets is still at a very nascent stage in India. So when we say secondary markets, we are mainly looking at 11 cities, smaller cities like Guwahati, Patna, Coimbatore, Bhubaneswar, etc. And like I mentioned, these smaller cities currently have a small base. They together contribute around 13% to overall warehousing demand. But the important thing to note here is the strong growth in demand that they have been witnessing. So in FY20, we saw that the demand from the secondary markets grew by a healthy 20%. And this is at the time when we saw the overall economy slowing and we saw the overall warehousing demand from the top 8 markets moderating. So this sharp growth that we have been seeing highlights the healthy potential from secondary markets going forward. Next. So with this whole e-commerce competition intensifying, we feel that the e-commerce players will now move. They start focusing on reducing the delivery timelines, and hence the demand for in-city warehousing will sharply pick up going forward. There are a lot of challenges with in-city warehousing. For instance, the land zoning is not favorable in city centers, is not favorable for warehousing segment. Then even the cost of land and construction is much higher for in-city warehousing, resulting in the rentals being much higher than the peripheral locations. In-city warehousing also requires higher capex, which in turn will require longer lease tenure and lock-in period. But we feel that the demand for in-city warehousing is going to pick up, and to begin with, the scope will be limited to 3-4 metro cities in India. So another important point to note here is that the warehousing segment has been recording very strong PE investment. So in the last 3 years, we have seen PE investment of around $6.5 billion in the warehousing segment. So with this increased interest of institutional players in the warehousing segment, the grade A stocks is likely to increase going forward. So now if you look at the table on the right, some of the markets like Chennai and Pune have a high share of grade A stock at around 70%. But some of the relatively older markets like Mumbai and NCR still have a low share of grade A stock. If you look at Mumbai, the share of grade A stock it is at around 17%. So this also highlights the huge potential of growth in grade A warehousing going forward. Next. So with that, we come to the supply side of the story. And here we are saying that this potential of additional 193 million square feet of supply from existing warehousing land. And how do we say that? So in total, around 21,000 acres of land has been allocated for warehousing, which implies that there is potential to develop around 500 million square feet of warehousing. The current warehousing stock that we already have is around 307 million square feet. So based on that, we are saying that this potential of additional 193 million square feet supply from the existing warehousing land. Now, if we look at this warehousing potential, as you can see from the table, it's highest in the markets of Mumbai and NCR. Just go back to the slide, previous slide. So as the potential is the next slide. Yeah, sorry. So as I was saying, the potential is highest in the markets of Mumbai and NCR. In fact, Mumbai has the highest existing stock also. And if you see, the vacancy level in Mumbai market is at a low of around 11%. So in fact, if you look at the top 8 markets and if you look at the overall vacancy level, it comes to around 15%, which is quite good. And it shows that the market is fairly balanced currently. So we'll be talking about some of these issues more in detail in our panel discussion going forward. So with that, I'll end our presentation. So the report will be subsequently just after this webinar. It will be sent to all the participants. And you can also download it from our website, knightfrank.co.in/research. So now I'll hand over to Akshita.
Thank you, Rajni, and thank you for the insights. I would like to introduce the topic for today's webinar now. Bridging the middle, transforming warehousing industry in India. What will be the winning trends? The session moderator for today is Mr. Shishir Baijal, who is the Chairman and Managing Director for Knight Frank India. Shishir is an industry veteran with 4 decades of experience in diverse industries that include real estate, hospitality, education, and entertainment. He has been instrumental in setting up one of India's foremost funds, Everstone Capital Advisors. But just before we start the webinar, I have a few housekeeping announcements. I request all the panelists to keep their video on during the entire discussion and only unmute the mic when you talk. Before we begin, I would like to request all the attendees to keep your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we will be running polls during the session. I will request all the attendees to kindly participate in that. Over to you, Shishir.
Thank you, Akshita, and good morning, everyone. And welcome to the distinguished star-studded panel that we have today. Before I start, I just thought I'd just say a few words, really, and before I introduce the panel. I mean, this has been an extraordinary last 4 months, which has really changed the way we live, the way we work, the fact that all of us are attending this webinar from various places, some from our home, some from where, is itself reflective of the different life that we are leading today, post early March. If we look at real estate, there's been changes everywhere. Residential is accommodating work from home. Offices are looking at 30-35% occupancies, social distancing. Hospitality and retail are a different world altogether, as well as shopping centers, movie theaters, most of which are now open in this country today. It'll be great to understand really what the impact of this COVID and the pandemic will have on the warehousing industry. And that's something that we will definitely talk about during the panel discussion. Before I start the panel, it'll be interesting to see how many of our asset classes in real estate have done over the last 5 months. If I look at yesterday's report on how the REITs have performed in the US since January this year, for the 6 months, of which I'm saying close to 4 months were affected by the COVID-19, you will see that the hospitality REIT today is down 51%. The retail REITs are down 39%. Commercial office REITs are down 26%. Residential REITs down by 20%. And industrial warehousing is same as last year, only reduction of 1%. Not to mention that data centers are up 16% over last year. And that itself is a way of looking at things to see how this pandemic has affected the entire spectrum of real estate. With this, I'd like to introduce our panel to you. It's a great privilege for me to have Dr. Niranjan Hiranandani present today. Niranjan Bhai, of course, is the co-founder and managing director of Green-Based Industrial and Logistics Park. He is the co-founder and managing director of the Hiranandani Group, and which has really helped redefine real estate in India by creating iconic projects. More recently, his firm entered the warehouse segment with Green-Based Industrial and Logistics. In his other role, he spearheads as the national president of NAREDCO, the National Real Estate Development Council, as well as he's the president of one of the oldest trade bodies of India, ASSOCHAM. Dr. Hiranandani, it's a pleasure and honor having you with us.
My pleasure to be with you, Sesha.
Thanks, Nanbai. Of course, along with him is another doyen of the industry, Dr. Shashikaran Shetty, founder and chairman of All Cargo Logistics. Dr. Shetty is the executive chairman and joint managing director of All Cargo Logistics, India's largest integrated logistics company in the private sector. Dr. Shetty, as all of us know, has been in the industry for more than 30 years, and he's a pioneer of the logistics sector, helping it to develop into the sector that it has become today. Welcome, Dr. Shetty. Mr. Rajesh Jaggi, Vice Chairman, Real Estate, Everstone Group. Rajesh has close to 25 years of real estate leadership experience in India and is Vice Chairman of the Everstone Group, a premier investment group focused on India and Southeast Asia, with assets in excess of $5 billion across private equity, real estate, green infrastructure, and venture capital. Along with him, we have Mr. Mehul Shah, CEO Logos. Mehul has over 20 years of experience in logistics, real estate, investment management, and international business management. Logos India, a real estate platform with operations in Australia, China, Southeast Asia, and India, has total assets exceeding US $7 billion under its management. Logos India in India is a JV between the Logos Group and the Assets Group, which is aimed at creating world-class warehouse infrastructure for logistics in India.
Morning, Shishir. Thank you. Good to be part of this panel.
Welcome, Mehul. We have there along with us from the Occupiers Group, Mr. Satyam Chaudhary, he's Senior Director Supply Chain, Flipkart. Satyam is the Senior Director, New Supply Chain Capabilities at Flipkart, India's e-commerce leader, where over the last 5 years, he has focused on creating reliable, scalable, and efficient supply chains. Flipkart, of course, as all of us know, is known for its path-breaking supply chain innovations like cash on delivery, assured guarantees, and big billion-day sales. Umesh Madhyan, Associate Vice President, Hindustan Coca-Cola. Umesh is a supply chain expert in the multinational FMCG business and has more than 20 years of experience in regional sales administration and logistics, international procurement, national physical distribution, and re-engineering the supply chain process for SAP implementation. Umesh is a steering committee member of AmCham, CII, and USIBC, and currently the president of the Chamber of Visionary Supply Chain Leaders. Welcome, Umesh.
Thank you.
Sriram Venkasubramaniam, President and Head of Global Operations and Supply Chain, Glenmark Pharmaceuticals. Sriram has over 24 years experience in end-to-end supply chain, business transformation, human resource and information technology, with leading multinational organizations in health, food and beverage, consumer goods, and software. He's passionate about roles with high ownership, accountability, and P&L impact, opportunities to drive transformational change, having a meaningful impact on business, people's life, and environment. Welcome, Sriram.
Thank you, Shishir.
From Australia, let me welcome Robert Bridge, Chairman of Primeland. Robert is the Chairman of the Primeland Group in Australia. Over the last 2 decades, Primeland has been involved in the acquisition and transformation of commercial assets of significant scale across Australasia to the likes of General Motors, Ford Motors, PepsiCo, One Steel, to name a few. The company has in excess of 20 million square feet of commercial, industrial, hospitality, and residential projects in its portfolio. Robert is extremely keen and they're entering India and they're studying closely the development of our logistics and warehousing sector. And finally, I have great pleasure in introducing Tim Armstrong, head of our occupier service and commercial agency in Knight Frank, Asia Pacific, based out of Singapore. With more than 15 years of experience in the commercial real estate industry, Tim helps corporate real estate professionals develop and execute their workplace property strategies. Having a deep historical expertise in the industrial and logistic market, Tim leverages his expertise in the rapidly evolving supply chain landscape to help professionals develop effective change management strategies. Welcome all, and as I said, it's indeed a great honor to have a panel as distinguished as this. Welcome all. First question to you, Niranjan Bhai. You've created iconic townships in India. Many of the townships known after your own firm. In Mumbai, Mumbai, Thane, Unveil, Chennai, etc. You have recently entered the field of warehousing and logistics. What was your vision, or what is your vision for this industry?
Morning, Shashir. I think it's a privilege to be here. The report which has been released has been extremely exciting, to say the least. And I think it justified exactly what we were thinking about in terms of the opportunity which is going to be there. Today, of course, this sounds to be even more accelerated, not slowing down, in view of the fact that logistics will probably, and industrialization is going to be extremely important to India, especially in the Atmanirbhar India, as well as the Make in India thought process and anti-China concepts that are now working on. I think we're going to be more inward looking in terms of the opportunities that are going to be there. So I think all the sections that have been mentioned in the report look on the growth story. The minimum is 20% and the maximum is 60–70%. The second part of it, which I wanted to add on, is along with warehousing, industrial parks are also going to grow. So you're going to see a marriage of sort of industrial park growth, which is going to take place. And I believe you me, in ASSOCHAM, I have been called upon by the industry ministers of almost half the states in India on personal calls as to how we can possibly leapfrog this situation of both industrialization, warehousing, and the others. So the opportunity, according to me, is going to be a huge growth in both these spheres. The e-commerce, of course, taking a double trend in these months, but that could change, because I think the second part of industrialization is also going to be an opportunity which we cannot see today. But I think that opportunity is going to probably grow by multiple scales in the next couple of weeks, months. So opportunity is definitely there. And of course, you mentioned data centers. So we are also looking at data centers very strongly. Can't hear you.
Thanks, Niranjan Bhai. And as usual, you've picked on the right sector to expand at the right time. But coming back to Dr. Shetty, he's been in the sector for 30 years, and I think perhaps has seen it all, from the go-downs in Bhiwandi to the perhaps has dealt with far more complicated logistics things than anybody else has done. Dr. Shetty, what do you think are the main, post this pandemic, what do you think will be the main changes that have happened and will happen as we move on, continue on, Shashiji?
Yeah, first of all, I can't agree more with my friend, Dr. Hiranandani. He very well summarized the entire sector and the growth opportunities and the entire report on the future potential of this sector. In my point of view, to add to what Dr. Hiranandani said, the prosperity of India is only possible if, in addition to services, manufacturing is going to be one of the most important drivers, because that is what India will ensure getting jobs, and the jobs will lead to consumption, and consumption will lead to the aspiration of a 5 trillion economy. So the government of today has the right intentions, but the governments need to ensure that at the ground level, things work. In our country, we have seen when it comes to things comes to government, they move pretty slow unless their back is against the wall. Now, that is something we have to change. The government has to change post-COVID situation and the anti-China sentiments that is prevailing right now. I think every government at the bottom of the pyramid, right to the center, have to consider that this is one of the biggest opportunity And otherwise, India might get into deeper crisis. So that's the first point. The second point, to facilitate manufacturing and consumption, one of the main thing is, how do you set up infrastructure? One of the key suggestions that I've been making to the government is that somehow revive the special economic zones, which are there outside the ports, which have been approved in the past. For example, Mundra or Krishnapatnam or many other ports where there is a lot of land bank and land were acquired for the purpose of building manufacturing facilities. But unfortunately, that whole story we all know, we don't need to repeat, but that can be revived. I think a scheme like Vivad Se Vishwas kind of a scheme can be brought in to revive these special economic zones, where you could have factories and warehouses can coexist and help the entire supply chain to bring the cost down in addition to the manufacturing. The second point is the governments can offer land at the industrial zones, like a Maharashtra Industrial Development Corporation or all the Gujarat Industrial Development Corporations, if they all come up with a common vision to set up factories and also set up warehousing facilities at an economical rate. So the land acquisition becomes far more easier and attractive for an investor to invest in this land, because the land is already aggregated by the government and there are no hassles about land acquisition. Thirdly, the Indian Railways. The Indian Railways have so much of land in city and outside the city. And a lot of these land can be developed for the purpose of future development of the warehousing sector. And you could also have warehousing sector where you could also offices which can coexist. In many parts of Europe, as we all know, that there are offices operate from the warehouse itself. So you don't need to create another office for setting up your day-to-day operation. Lastly, I think it's very, very critical. I think post-COVID, the government works really on changing the mindset of our bureaucracy. If you look at organizations, why organizations are efficient is because there's a very strong process of assessing people. So I would recommend that there should be some thought process that Indian government creates a Ministry of Transparency and Accountability, and they focus only on what is the opportunity that we lost, or what is the collective loss that the country has to experience because of the delay in decision making or having an archaic loss. So the Controller General of India, for example, can report to this kind of a ministry. And I think there's a great potential to set up something like that. So that's my macro level thoughts. Thank you very much.
Shetty, great points. And of course, we need those reforms. And I'll come back a little later to Niranjan Bhai on this one. But just to continue this line of questioning, that means you're also saying, one side, of course, government can aggregate the land because land is one of the biggest issues. But to remain relevant, for logistics to remain relevant, and if this dream is to really come true, then there would be a requirement for land reforms, right? Land acquisition, land reforms, labor reforms, etc. That would be the crying need for this to really happen. But many times we've tried this, and the moment it comes to land acquisition, it all really, all falls down. And that's seemed to be one of the biggest barriers in growing this business.
100% right. Yeah. So I think I hope that the government comes back with the ordinance on the land reforms, which, as you'll recall, 5 years ago when Mr. Modi came to power, he wanted to bring that ordinance, but then since it didn't have the majority in the Rajya Sabha or whatever the other pressures there may have been, so that land ordinance has not been seen thereafter. So I hope the government really comes back with this land ordinance, although it may not be a very popular decision to make, but today is the best opportunity to since they have the majority in the Lok Sabha and in the Rajya Sabha. And if they don't do it now, when are they going to do it? And I think, warehousing, we also talk a lot about very high logistic cost in our country. And if you look at it, the Indian logistic companies are as competitive or as professional or better than many of the developing economies. I can tell you that because I see it. I talk to people on everyday basis. We experience it. The logistic operation in the country is extremely smooth and competitive. But the problem is on a red tape, and the problem is on our road infrastructure, our warehousing infrastructure, our port infrastructure. That is what actually adds to the high logistic cost, which we keep saying is 14%, and the developed economies, it is 8%. So where is that 6% delta? The 6% delta you can easily attribute to the infrastructure and the bureaucracy that goes behind the entire scene of the handling of the business. So my appeal is that the government should do everything to make sure that the infrastructure is built in the country. All
Thank
sorts
you
of
so much. That was extremely insightful, and that I think will create a fair amount of debate as we move on. Before I move to the next question, in the presentation that we had just done with Rajni, she mentioned that whilst the business had grown by 44% CAGR over the last 3 years, this year in financial year 20, we did see a small drop, of around 11%. I would just like to put up a poll question for the audience to let's understand what do they think that would the transaction volume would be for financial year 21 before I come to to Mr. Rajesh Jaggi for the next question. If I could just have the poll question, which you can just answer in 5 seconds, please. Thank you. So whilst you are getting the result of the poll, Rajesh, the sector has seen a remarkable growth over the last few years, especially since the imposition of GST in 2017 and the infrastructure input. We shouldn't forget that. I think the amount of, in terms of the roads and what Dr. Shetty was saying in terms of the ports and airports, etc. What do you think because the fall in the numbers also coincided with perhaps India's lowest level of GDP growth for a long time, when we closed around about 4% in March this year. Do you think that the sector will be able to bounce back and will have far more growth?
Yeah, so thanks, Shishir, for having me on this panel. Just a couple of things here. I think that, firstly, I'll just take a step back and to what Dr. Hiranandani and Mr. Shetty was saying. Predominantly before GST, the industrial sector was something that was very buoyant, and we also as Indospace focused on that, and we saw that there was a move and a shift towards industrialization in those years. The warehousing sector before the GST came out, was very nascent. There wasn't too much demand. There were very small warehouses being put up in different states. And because of collective tax not being at the center, we actually didn't see a boom in the warehousing sector. I think GST changed it all. And from 2017, we've actually seen tremendous amount of demand and a boom in the warehousing sector because there's consolidation, there's requirement of grade A warehousing spaces, etc., which we all know why there's a boom. My view is when I look at where we stand today, I think there are two concerns that I have. I think firstly, to me, this year, that is 2020 to 2021, unfortunately for me, it's a washout. We're sitting here in July. We are in the midst of a monsoon. We haven't been able to really mobilize our sites to 100%. We've got labor issues, we've got material issues. So I think in the short term, I'm not at all bullish on this, on just generally everything. I think it's nothing to do with the industry. It's just how do we get back post-COVID? And I think that's where my concern is, and we are facing it on the ground, every day. I believe that in the midterm and the long term, both industrial and the warehousing sector has a fantastic boom as far as India is concerned, and namely, pretty much couple of simple reasons, right? Okay, on warehousing and logistics, I think there's tremendous demand that's there. We just need the economy to crank up. We've seen in the last 12 months the kind of demand that's there. Obviously, I think post-COVID there will be a thrust on e-commerce because people will change the way they live, and we're already seeing the e-commerce companies actually coming to us for short-term, medium-term, long-term plans for their growth stories. I also believe that if India plays it right, we have a large scope on industrialization. I think that that's something that the government should pick up. I think it should be a consolidated effort across India and not the way it's happening currently, which is a state level effort where though Dr. Nandani said everyone called him, but we need a pan India industrialization thrust, which was like made in India. And I think that's the critical thing. I think what's happening right now, it's being broken up to different states. Every state is fending for themselves. And I think that if we don't have a national policy to attract industry into India, we are going to lose this opportunity again. So my belief is there's a huge scope. Even today, there are enough inquiries coming in, from a manufacturing sector. I think for India to bounce back, real estate has provided the maximum number of jobs, and it's important for the government to focus on real estate and especially on manufacturing, because that's where we can crank up the economy again.
Thanks, Rajesh, and thanks for the honest feedback really on the numbers. Though I must say that the participants were very optimistic. 46% of them said that they will have a higher number than last year. But I do feel that among all the asset classes, and I leave this open for debate, I think from the occupiers' point of view, Umesh, Satyam, and Sriram may have an answer too. I feel that the recovery in industrial warehousing will be far more V-shaped than in many of the others, which could take a little more longer time to get back. But yes, we have to get this COVID out. We've got to start living normally again and get the demand in. But you would still be interested as India as a whole, and Everstone would still be optimistic about investing in greenfield projects in warehousing in India, wouldn't they, Rajesh? Or you relooking at the India strategy?
No, I think, from our perspective, again, on the medium and the long term, we are very bullish on this sector. We continue to invest. We have not changed our plans, and we are on track as far as our pre-COVID plans are concerned. So we are not actually withdrawing back. We are very bullish on this sector in the long run.
Fantastic. Mehul, if I can just come to you. The other point that we had also mentioned was that grade in the smaller towns, other than the 8, I hate calling them smaller towns, other than the 8 major metros, the warehousing grade A stock is less than 13% of the total stock. Do you think there is a potential as we move and people like Flipkart and e-commerce spreads around the country? Is there an opportunity for us to get to all the smaller towns?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking this. It's a very, very relevant question. And even I hate to call them B-grade cities. I mean, if you look at top 20 cities, probably that will still rank higher when compared to the developed world, looking at the population, the density we have. I would look at the demand probably, or maybe the rationale for having the growth of the e-commerce or warehousing in these cities is a factor of push and pull. Now before I answer push, let's understand what's pulling this demand basically. And if the real growth has to happen, there are a couple of factors that we should try and look at. As we all aware, the literacy ratio, India's literacy ratio keeps going up by every year. I mean, India adds close to 5% of literacy every 10 years. So today we are at 75% of the literacy rate as compared to 10 years back where we were like 69%. So the higher the literacy ratio, higher the better standard of living, higher expectation, and higher urbanization. India has a record of urbanizing 4% every 1 decade. So the data says we are at 36% urbanized India. But if you look at the global definition, probably India is 70% urbanized, looking at the population density. And also the per cap, the problem is India is the per capita of this density, which is very low. I mean, but if you look at in terms of the population, India is probably 70% urbanized. That's 2. Third is the e-commerce penetration. Today, e-commerce penetration is only 5% across all India, and on the panel, Satyam can probably vouch this. India has a e-commerce growth at around 35% year on year. And the more and more e-commerce and digitalization this happens, basically India will go more deeper. And with 5% also, which is of this 5% penetration of e-commerce, it is also skewed towards majority 60% only between Bangalore, NCR, and Mumbai. Just imagine the growth at which we are sitting at an inflection point across India, including these metros and beyond these metros. One more factor which we've been trying to track is the entry of JioMart. If whatever we understand, if they are able to digitize the kirana in the B grade cities, which means kirana's supply chain today is largely dependent on fragmented stockists which exist in these B class cities. And if JioMart with the Facebook and the WhatsApp tie-up, which is like WhatsApp has 40 crore users, if they are able to digitize kiranas, the fulfillment center is a must, I mean, for all the B grade or C grade cities which we are talking about, which I hate to say B or C grade, but so that is inevitable.
Thanks, Mehul. Next question automatically. Satyam, you're on the limelight now. As Mehul said, the e-commerce penetration is only 5%. You're getting the issue of kirana stores across every pin code in this country today. Just tell us the e-commerce story. And what do you think? Will the 55% CAGR will continue on? And because right now, with the little bit of slowdown in manufacturing and the others, this entire industry is buoyed by the phenomenal growth in e-commerce. And what we're seeing in this pandemic is, of course, all of us are entirely dependent on e-commerce.
Sure. So a couple of things have become very clear in last 10 to 12 weeks. Number one, the consumer behavior has evolved dramatically as a result of the whole COVID experience. The factors that used to drive consumer shopping experience, be it, I mean, one of the most comprehensive analysis I have seen so far comes from one of the high street fashion retailers in US about how the criteria that drive where customer shops and how customer shops have dramatically shifted across various consumer segments within the span of just 12 weeks, so to speak. And I'm very anxious to see a similar data set that's being available for India, right? So while the logic and the initial data suggests that e-commerce will continue to have a strong attraction to the consumer base in India, I do expect that the segments of growth will probably shift. And that shift will be marked by various concerns on the health of the economy. The way the top 10 cities in India respond to a slowdown in economy is very different from the way the rest of India responds to these shifts, right? The top 10 cities are more resilient about consumption and about continuing strong consumption growth pattern part of it. On the other hand, e-commerce is also at an inflection point in India, right? Let me just say that the first 10 million, bringing first 10 million consumers online was challenging. Then it reached the first 100 million. But what is going to be super challenging now is going to be bringing next 100 million customers online, right? Now, this is the customer segment that is more distributed into the hinterlands of India. This is the customer segment that is doing a follow-up on the technology adoption curve. However, these are the challenges that e-commerce has signed up to solve for. Players like Flipkart and quite a few others have made commitments to make e-commerce work for Bharat, not just India, so to speak. And I believe that will continue to drive a very strong attraction of e-commerce to the customer segments in India. And COVID is going to shift some of the priorities and the segments on where this growth happens and how this growth happens, but it will continue to grow.
Thanks, Satyam. We're all looking forward to that. And now coming to another topic, which I think Dr. Hirandani spoke about initially and Shashiji spoke about. And before that, I'll just have a poll. This is a second poll, which says that whilst there's a lot of discussion happening today on shifting some of the businesses from the manufacturing business from China, out of China into countries like India, and what do we think about it? And are we ready? Are we ready? Do we really think that it will be possible? So if there is people as the world hedges their bets, removing the entire base of manufacturing from China, how much do you think we can garner our share of the business that moves from China? 0 to 20%, 20 to 40%, or above 40%? So with this, of course, we got the results. We'd say 50% of us say is 0 to 20. Then I'll come back to you a little later on this one. And there's only 14% which says above 40. If I can come to Tim Armstrong, really. Tell us, Tim, what are the changes that are happening in APAC? And this whole discussion about move from China to various countries, and countries like India, Vietnam, etc., all vying for the same business. Can you tell us some of the trends that are happening, and what are the trends you're also looking at in this whole sector pre and post-COVID?
Yeah, thanks, Shashir. I mean, I'll touch first on the China story, because I think that's something that's highly topical and everyone is talking about it. I think you've got to go back a step, and the shift out of China has been going on for 10 years. So it's been going into lower cost manufacturing bases like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Thailand, and so on. So this isn't a new phenomenon by any stretch, but it's been exacerbated and sped up now because of the anti-China sentiment that's happening. I think the one thing to understand, though, it's not that easy for a manufacturer just to shut down a plant, pick it up, move it. It's very costly. It takes time. The one thing about China too, manufacturing in China has some efficiencies about it. It's done on a huge scale. There's fast rail to move between towns. So it has its efficiencies and it is effective. So look, there will be a shift out of China, but it's not going to happen all of a sudden in 12 months or 18 months or so on. It's going to be a more gradual thing. But I think, therefore, for India to get its share, the comment was made before about infrastructure. I mean, infrastructure is key. Good rails, good port. And also the thing going back to China, it's a huge market in its own right. It's the biggest e-commerce market in the world. So, if you're set up in China, you've got 1.3 billion people with a very wealthy middle class who can consume your goods straight away. So, look, I think for India to get its place, it's going to need to be a path of least resistance from a government standpoint, and also to have really good infrastructure. So that's where I'd sort of see that going. I mean, in terms of the other trends we're seeing around Asia, certainly that shifting in the Asia-Pac supply chains is happening. We're seeing a lot more built to suit in the industrial space. So a lot more groups are wanting, there's a flight to quality. So they're wanting better space so they can get their racking right, their supply chain within their warehouse right as well. So they're willing to pay a little bit more for quality and to have their buildings in the right place. A lot more studies by supply chain consultants. I think it's going to be a growing industry where they're really looking at getting it in the right place so they can get to the customer quicker than the competitor and have that sort of competitive edge. And then I'd say automation in sort of more mature markets where labour is costly. We're sort of seeing a lot more automation coming into warehouses, especially with COVID. A machine in a warehouse doesn't get sick. It doesn't take sick days. It can run 24/7. So they would probably be the 3 or 4 sort of trends that we're seeing.
Thanks, Tim. And that's the real question. And that's a question for you, Dr. Hiranandani. The Honorable Prime Minister's dream of making this into a $5 trillion economy in 2025, thing that Rajesh spoke about just now, the Make in India, Bharat, India, everything. How do we make it happen? I mean, how does, as Tim was saying, it's not that easy to shift a factory from China. What do we need to do in India? And I'm talking to you and your cap as the ASSOCHAM chief and NEREDCO chief. What do we need to do in the country to really actualize this dream?
Well, there are too many issues to be settled. The first of all is the bureaucracy of India. The second is the policy that we cannot look back ever. You can't have backdated policies which come up and say that the taxation which was decided 5 years ago has suddenly different interpretations to what you have. The third is, of course, the land and labor reforms which have already started. We have to give credit to the government on a very big factor. Probably one of the bigger factors is the fact that today we are the lowest corporate tax in the almost the whole world. Our tax rate at 17% in terms of new businesses, 25% otherwise is the lowest tax corporate entities probably in this part of the world. So I think some start has taken place. But what Tim says is right. It's going to be difficult because the kind of internal business which is available in China gives it a natural scalable model. So they're able to scale the model, which brings about efficiencies in terms of cost and delivery schedules which are possible. So if you want a scalable order to China, you're able to do it. That kind of scalable, replicatable model into India will be difficult. But I think the situation has changed. The situation has changed because the fear of the world to actually not give the leadership to China in such a way that the strategic position of China could be a danger to the world will draw definitely people out of China, and it's already happening. Japan has done it in a very, very structured way, saying that this is the percentage which is going to happen in the next 3 years. We are also committed in a big way, but I think we will find it very difficult to do so because we have been lazy. We haven't made the changes to be effective fast enough in order to take the challenges of the thing. So while we will have Mr. Shetty running a very, very efficient transportation network and other system, he gets bogged down by various things, and sometimes the ports will not have instructions as to what is to be done with the next cargo to be picked up. Now, this kind of, what should I say, end-to-end solution needs to be done. We are making a beginning. It's going to take some time to make these changes happen. But I think the intention is there. Hopefully, action will be there. But some percentage of growth will take place. But that's why I think you got the figure that it is going to be 20 to 25, around 20% or less than 20%, rather than the 60% as we should have tried to do. For example, in the last 8 days, when I saw a report of the 42 companies looking outside China, 23 just thought of Vietnam. Now, obviously, there is something to Vietnam which must be positive vis-a-vis India. I think we need to have the government actually go to Vietnam, study Vietnam, and find out what really is working to the difference. And if we can benchmark ourselves to the change, or maybe Tim can tell us and enlighten us why it is Vietnam and not India. And the last, sorry to take long, the last 2 years, 3 years, let's take the example. Textiles moved out of China because of economics. The labor costs went up. That the business went to Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam, not India. Let's understand, forget the present situation. Why in the last 3 years, textiles, where cotton is available in India, we were not the country to actually take it up. Same reason. I think a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of policy measures that needs to be done. And also, as Mr. Shetty correctly said, the supply chain in terms of the government movement of infrastructure and connectivity also needs to be done.
Thanks very much. I just want to ask this, just a same question to Shetty sir. Dr. Shetty, what do you think? And just to add on what Niranjan Bhai has said, your views on the same? You're on mute, sir.
I think I have already mentioned, Shishir, that we are reactive nation till our wall is against the back, our back is against the wall, right? So the economy, instead of growing, now is degrowing. I hope our political system, more than political system in our country, I think they are more accountable because they have to face elections every 5 years, or rather every year, because of state elections are also happening within those 5 years. So the political systems are far more accountable than our bureaucratic machinery, right? And we all know that. There is nothing to hide in this fact. I think somehow we'll have to get the bureaucracy to be more accountable, and by having some large debate across the country about what are the opportunities and what are the costs to the nation out of these delays and inactions. And if these numbers come to forefront, then a lot of press coverage, a lot of questions asked around these things. Today, what happens is everything goes under the file. Nobody knows everybody knows, but it is not quantified, or it has not been debated, not been discussed. Why a Control General of India has to only audit the scams or misappropriations? Why can't they audit the performance of the people who've been the nation's one of the most important machinery? There is no review. There is no mechanism to really make them accountable, right? And for that to happen, of course, they have to be empowered. There has to be strong policies. There has to be very clarity need to happen. And people have to become very honest, including the business community. And I think there's a big thing that happened over the last few years about the accountability of the business in terms of the fear of law, right? Now, people don't think about taking money from bank and run away, and they can't run anymore. So I think these kind of reforms have happened. I think we need more transformational reforms in the country. Otherwise, it is going to be only incremental. It is not going to be transformational. So what we need to aspire is transformational. Sorry,
Thank you so
Shirish,
much.
I need to leave.
Thank you, Dr. Shetty, and that was great because it will be a golden opportunity if we lose this one, and at this time. And thank you, Dr. Shetty. I know you have a board meeting to go. Thank you so much.
And also to add a little bit to the what I earlier said, that we are now having multiple challenges as a country. We have the security issues going on. I think China is putting a lot of pressure on India, and all this standoff is obviously to send a signal to the international investors that India is not a safe place for you to come, because obviously they are very scared of India about their economy, their loss in the manufacturing or whatever the other thing is, right? So we need to be conscious to these facts and move fast. I think otherwise we'll miss another golden opportunity.
I agree.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, panelists. I'm sorry I have to leave.
Thanks.
And I'm sure they can take all the questions which is coming from the audience on my behalf. Thank you very much, Shishir.
Thank you, Dr. Shetty,
for this opportunity.
Fantastic. Just moving on now to the importance of logistics parks. And we spoke about warehousing, now just coming to logistics park. This question is to Robert Bridge. What do you think is the importance of logistics park, and how can a well-planned industrial precinct really increase productivity as well as promote sustainability?
Thanks, Shishir, and fellow panelists. Hello to all, and our dear viewers too. Thank you for having me. It's a cold afternoon in Melbourne here, but good to have a chat and have some ideas bouncing around and share our experiences. So I think, given that, I think most of the panelists have already covered, how Make in India concept has to catch up and some of the challenges which are being faced in the local market there. In our experience here, we've been operating in Australian market for the last 3 decades. We have seen how things have transformed, and we understand the value of government's involvement when it comes to planning and execution. Business parks are absolutely the bloodline for an economy, given that they are the employment centers, the growth centers, and also the basis of the economy moving forward. They play a extremely key role. Now, when it comes to business parks, obviously there are scales, and then the advantages of having scales and sharing of resources. I was in Nagpur a couple of years back, and I saw this Mihan, which is it's It's a project which was a wonderfully vision project, which was supposed to take off. Boeing was supposed to set up their repair centers, and a very well thought project. And so, look, when it comes to whether it's a manufacturing business park or a food-based logistic, food-based logistic park, or any industrial, or whether it's pharmaceutical, the business parks have to have the right infrastructure in place for the businesses to start moving forward, to collaborate with each other. There's a lot of learning which takes place between the businesses when they are located in business park. I think that's a great advantage. It's something which our companies in India can take a massive advantage, because when they are located in a specific business zone, they can have shared concerns, and they can share ideas, which actually helps the companies to grow in a much better way, and also they can pull weight when it comes to dealing with politicians.
Thank you. Thanks, Robert. Just coming back to two of our, this is for Umesh Marlin, really. And, Umesh, Coca-Cola has been, I think, there long before, I think, the beginning of the logistics sectors, and you've really seen it all from, and I think you're one of those products that are present in virtually every corner in this country. When you hear this debate about the modernization and automation and getting more productivity in the warehousing, could you shed some light on supply chain management and how important it is, and what have you seen, and what do you think the new normal will be in the post-COVID era, and what do you want from the warehousing sector?
Thank you, Shishir. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for having me here. And that's a long question. I'll try to see how quickly I can answer that. So from a warehousing perspective, the strategy for Coke always has been to palletize transport. So we essentially are a large scale organization. It's a very large scale, one of the top 3 in terms of number of trucks handling per day, I would say. So from that perspective, it's important for us to also ensure productivity from a docking perspective. So everything is actually cascaded down from there. So all the strategies around how do we palletize. So this strategy has been for the last 4 to 5 years now, and proud to share that people don't even realize that more than 2/3 of what we handle every day is basically palletized today as we speak. And we are close to touching about 90% in very soon, in next 9 to 12 months from now. So this is a long journey where we had done a lot of automation, a lot of process change, a lot of change management from a unorganized transport industry perspective. So that's one biggest pillar which we have. We have solutions like auto loading docks, which can load manually about 1,000 cases in less than 3 minutes, where you just need a driver to press a button and everything moves inside. So we have 4 of those already in India. We're planning to expand that to close to 8 very soon. We have solutions which are customized with companies like JCB, which is a load all, which is a telescopic boomer like a forklift, which goes inside a truck, drops a pallet and comes back. So we have about 12 of those right now. So these are the kind of automations which we keep on doing. And thanks to all of this work, which we have been doing for the last 4 to 5 years as a strategy, as a vision, which we had for logistics, which is helping us in these unprecedented times. Because let me break this to you all. I heard about the discussion on warehousing, on space, etc. The P&Ls of organizations, FMCGs in India have gone back to 2016, 2017. I think let us realize that that's the hard fact. That's reality. Let's be pragmatic. And the capacities which we have right now are close to 1.5x, 2x of what we actually need right now, because the demand has dropped, business is suffering, and all of this is a very hard fact. So I would say, even if in 2020, like Mehul said, is washed off completely. For us, all the plans for 2021 are versus 2019, as if 20 does not exist at all. So our estimates are, even if 2021 hits 2019 numbers, it will be great to begin with, which means we still have excess capacity, because we prepared capacity for the season of 2020, which had a very decent CAGR. We have been having a very decent CAGR for the last couple of years. You have been reading in the news. And basis that, we are augmenting capacity both in terms of warehousing and in terms of transport. But right now we have all the capacities. I think key is collaboration. How do we collaborate? How do we get into multi-user? How do we monetize warehousing? How do we collaborate with people? We have already started collaboration with people like HUL, Dr. Reddy's, trying to talk to many people on transportation. Warehousing still seems a little bit to be tougher, which we should do more, and 3PLs can of course help. Coming back to the question, technology again is a key piece for us from a warehousing perspective. We have about one automatic storage and retrieval system in Goglitch, one of the best warehouses in the country, handles about more than 400 pallets per hour per day. So that's state-of-the-art warehouse. We have a similar high-definition ASRS, which is one again in one more plant in Gujarat and one more plant which we are trying to come up in West Bengal. So these are the kind of automations which we have. We use IoT for yard management. We use digital signature. We use automatic e-way billing, where we need not go into the NIC portal for every invoice. And these are the kind of things which we have been doing for the last 3, 4, 5 years, which is helping us to have more productive as an operation. And from a COVID perspective, in the new normal, I think the biggest challenge right now is managing social distancing, because in India, with this level of population, we are not accustomed to a social distancing design or layout of a warehouse or a factory shipping area. So getting that correct is one of the biggest challenge, because right now it's leaner season. Being a tropical climate, people will again get into season, and it will be really, really tough in season to have those many people in those facilities, ensure social distancing, the 1 meter, the 2 meter rule, having less people in the canteen. So all this is going to put a lot of stress on productivity. So as I look at it, I think paperless transactions and a lot of automation around safety, hygiene, COVID practices is something which should take a lot of trend right now in H2. Having said that, investments I think will low down, because people don't have cash. There is no capex. People are not going to heavily invest. Only paperless transactions, and probably RPA is one kind of tech which might catch a lot of steam, so that we have more productivity around warehousing, and we can make more safer an environment for people to work.
Thanks, Umesh. Just getting down to Sriram. Of course, the obvious question with Sriram would be, when do you think we'll have a vaccine against COVID-19? And that's something we all wanted to look for. But after he answers that, if you can help us along again as part of the supply chain, because I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen in the COVID era is the collapse or somehow the challenge of the supply chain management. And what do you think about that? And what do you think the changes will be in the post-COVID era to take the supply chain management to be effortless, really?
Sure. Thanks, Shishir. Thanks for having me on the panel. It's been fascinating for me to listen to the views of the rest of the panelists as well. And I'm pretty sure the audience is getting its time worth from the insights here. I think the first question that you had is literally and figuratively a multi-million-dollar question. The only thing that I can say, not just on behalf of the pharma industry, but on behalf of all of us as human beings, is hopefully soon. The sooner the better, because at the end of the day, it's actually people who make the world go round, in a sense. And it is absolutely critical for us to be able to come up with something that truly helps save people's lives. And I guess that's the best answer we have as of date. It's been a privilege to be part of an organization that's been the first company in India to have an approved treatment option for COVID-19. But like I said, fingers crossed, hope it will turn out to be effective. And at the end of the day, what matters is, our ability to save lives. So hoping to be a part of that, success story as well. In terms of, challenges for the supply chain, and this really cuts across industry verticals, any organization, any sector that we talk of, I think we have been impacted. Specific to the pharma industry, it was very interesting to hear you talk about, this big opportunity that's starting to be made out now of the potential shift from China to India. And I think for the pharma industry, it's been particularly relevant because China happens to be, just like it does for so many other sectors, China also happens to be one of the biggest manufacturing bases in the world for APIs or active pharmaceutical ingredients. And I think that's a clear opportunity area. There's a lot that needs to be done because this is not a straightforward slam dunk kind of a manufacturing sector that you can set up and start overnight. A lot of thinking, planning has to go into this. And therefore, one is looking at lead times, one is looking at policies, one is looking at investments, and all the other challenges that have been discussed on the panel as of today. In terms of looking outward to the future, to your question on what the new normal would look like and what are the expectations, I'd like to share what I think are my top 5. I think the first, and Tim referred to this in his section earlier, I think the number 1 on the list for every pharma industry, and I suspect every industry, is going to be compliance. And Tim used a very interesting phrase that I think resonates strongly with the thinking that's prevalent across companies. He said, flight to quality. I think it's definitely a flight to quality, but also it's a flight and a preference towards more compliant warehouses from a safety standpoint, because at the end of the day, you have to have your products, your people, your infrastructure safe to be able to ensure business continuity. Specific to the pharma industry, quality, GMP compliance, the ability to manage stocks and to deliver accuracy in compliance with the prevalent GMP and quality standards is absolutely non-negotiable. And obviously, as we see, India is very rapidly and progressively moving towards a regulated kind of an environment, much more so for pharma, but compliance to regulations is also becoming extremely important. And therefore, safety, quality, regulatory compliance is going to be, in my opinion, the number 1 expectation, not just of the pharma industry, but for every company when it looks for warehousing and logistics solutions. The second, I think, is going to be speed. The reason I think is particularly relevant for pharma is because if you look at the nature of demand for pharma, I think it's going to continue to be very reasonable for us to say that the demand is going to be less indulgent in nature and is going to be more critical need based. Yes, there is a shift that we have to recognize. Consumers are getting more proactive. There is a greater shift towards preventative health, but that's going to take time, especially in a market like India, where there is a long way to go for healthcare as a sector to evolve and to mature. And in this kind of an environment, to be able to respond with speed and accuracy at the same time is going to be absolutely crucial. The third, I think, is related to one of the biggest shifts that we are seeing in terms of patient behavior and expectations. And I think that then is going to require the warehousing industry to be responsive to mass customization. Just to give an example, over the last 20, 25 years, one of the biggest shifts in the healthcare industry has been that of consolidation. You have big hospitals that are being set up, multiple doctors available in the same roof. But if you look at it from the patient's perspective, you need the patient to be mobile to actually get to these facilities to receive healthcare. So it works extremely well in terms of driving leverage of scale and the benefits that large volume transactions bring. But that's more from the healthcare provider's standpoint, not so much from the patient's standpoint. I think the future is going to be more about pull or demand-led responses. And for the warehousing industry to be able to respond to that, I think you have to be able to customize en masse and be relevant as well as be best in class versus competition to the individual patient, and also to be able to support this big trend that we are seeing of healthcare delivered at home. And that also means medicines delivered at home. And therefore, this ability to customize on a big scale, which is very different from the challenges that we've had in the past, is going to be absolutely key. The next one is that of flexibility. And I'd like to take a particular example here. And there was a mention, I think Mr. Shetty talked about this. A lot of what happens in supply chain in terms of progress has to ride on what happens in manufacturing. So on the one hand, when it comes to the warehousing industry, you have the need to be able to provide consolidated, large volume, high quality solutions in close proximity to where the manufacturing sources are located. On the other hand, you also have to be close to the patient. So when you look at the entire value chain of warehousing and logistics, I think you have to have the ability to provide custom built or built to suit solutions. not just in terms of physical infrastructure, but in terms of the services that you will be able to offer from that infrastructure, the technology, the responsiveness, the flexibility, and to do all this with a high level of accuracy as well. So proximity and flexibility is going to be the fourth important expectation. And I think Umesh touched upon this very clearly in his section when he said, we are not really in a position where we can provide a lot of capex. A lot of investment is still going to take time for the industry to receive. And I think in this kind of a context, to be able to provide number 1, 2, 3, 4 that I just talked about, but still be the best when it comes to total cost to serve is going to be an absolute challenge. And that, I would say, is going to be an even more important number 5. It will always figure in any wish list, but I think it's going to be absolutely critical over the next couple of years while we recover. So those would be my top 5 in terms of what the future is going to need.
Thanks, Sriram. And that leads us to the last question before I put it up for Q&A. And that's for Rajesh and Mehul. So going back by what Sriram was saying, if speed and proximity are going to be the key points in the warehouse of the future, and as Satyam was mentioning, the penetration of e-commerce going where it is, I think it's time that we bring many of our warehousing facilities closer to the consumer base. There's a lot of discussion happening today on having distribution centers in city, or what they call the in-city warehousing. It's been discussed for a long time, but we really haven't seen it actualizing. What do you think are the potential, and why do you think it's not been possible to have in the country? Just a short answer, and then we'll open it for Q&A. Rajesh, you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah. So I'll just quickly give you my view. I think that, all of us do want to set up, logistic and warehouse parks close to city limits. I think the first problem that we have is the land pricing. I think it does not match the rental expectations of our clients. Number 2, I think in city distribution across India, the laws that have been set up by various municipalities does not encourage or does not have a section on warehousing or building warehouses or multi-story buildings to stock a product. So I think that's something that we are grappling with, is how do we actually have the municipality actually insert sections in their development regulations wherein you can actually build warehouses and stock products. So it's missing, and I think that's a challenge. We've been talking to various governments to ensure that they actually do that, but it's a struggle. We are very bullish on the sector, but I think there are many challenges for us to kind of get.
Thanks, Rajesh. Mehul, your views on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so in addition to what Rajesh mentioned, internally we keep working on so many such proposals. We are so stuck between the two. I mean, I would say buyer's dilemma and the capital partners dilemma. I mean, do we really invest first and wait for the buyers to come in of the occupiers and then we do it? Or we have the buyer, we look at the buyer and then we try and go back with the capital partners and try and do this. Okay, this is where we are stuck in between. Otherwise, given regulation is one, but the kind of discussions we've had with the governments in the different various municipalities or industrial development corporations, they are extremely adaptive to the kind of new set of buildings that are required for the urban fulfillment centers. So somewhere it has to get resolved. And one of the very, very right point mentioned by Sriram on the consumer's expectation on buying healthcare online. So we believe that if urban fulfillment center has to really take off, there are two most important essential commodities. One is your daily life essentials has to move online. Number 2, your healthcare also has to move online. So if you look at the big box retail trend, which we saw in the early 2000, where everyone set up the stores, the big box future retails and the kind of stores, healthcare was still not, it never moved into a big box kind of thing. So everyone still goes back to the same chemist, and there is a modernization of the chemist that is happening in the last 5 to 10 years. But if this shift has to happen, I guess the urban fulfillment centers will see really a pickup only when one of the sectors, the healthcare, if that gets online, where the consumers really start buying medicines online and they get supplies within the time limit, when compared with the next door chemist, urban fulfillment centers are going to see the day of the light. Otherwise, we are trapped between the two. This is what I would say.
Thanks, Mehul. I'm really running short of time. I didn't get time to talk about my favorite topic, data centers, but maybe that's a separate topic in itself. I'll leave it now for the Q&A from the audience. We've had a fantastic crowd today. We had more than 1,500 people watching the panel show. And I would like to thank the READ group really for organizing and putting together this great show and having a group of people. Now let's leave it to them for some Q&As. Can I request Ghulam to just lead the Q&As to our esteemed panel, please?
Thank you, Shishir. Thank you so much. And of course, I shall be joined by my colleague.
Ghulam, you're on mute.
Am I?
Yeah.
Am I still on mute?
No.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So thank you so much, Shishir. And of course, it was an eye-opener for me as well, as more of a generalist from real estate sector, when a specific subject of warehousing was discussed at length, like the way it was today, an absolute eye-opener. Well, as I said, I will have my colleague Balbir Khalsa also joining to be a part of this question answer session. He will, the reason why we have two of us managing it is because the way we have been bombarded with questions, more than 1,500 to 1,600 participants, and even before the discussion started, we had questions coming in hordes. So in any case, we tried actually last almost about 45 minutes. We have been trying to streamline these questions and pick up, bucket them, bring them together, because it's a tough task to ask all those questions. One thing which is coming on top of it is, and quite a few people have asked this question, is about the need of a industry body, like you have the FICCIs and NAREDCOs, etc. Warehousing should also have one. In case if it is existing, it is not really on the forefront. So here, Shishir, whom would you want to address this question to? Because it's more of a very strategy level question. So should it be Mr. Hirandani to start with?
I would say so. He's the big boy.
We do have industry bodies, whether it is CII, ASSOCHAM, FICCI. We have NAREDCO and CREDAI, which also looks in the real estate part of it. But yes, there are always possibilities to focus on the issue of logistics and warehousing and other things, because you have an industry specific thing. So either it could be part of one of these larger organizations where we could have a kind of committees which would take care of that. Of course, you could set up a separate organization which only looks at that part of it. There are two parts again to it. One is that the central government and its policies which become important and relevant. And second, unfortunately, every state has its own issues that really need to be flagged off. So if you're setting up another organization, you not only has to set up one central one, but probably one in every state also as a branch office. So it's really there, worthwhile doing it. But in the meantime, you could tag on to one of the major organizations that we work with, and we could focus on it also until you create this new organization.
I'll take that. I mean, CII has a body on the warehousing group, very recently formed, 6 months back. And they are working on the warehousing real estate related, what are the A grade, what are the norms. I mean, each section of the warehousing part, CII has a warehousing group. I mean, where logos is also very actively playing important role.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both of you. And of course, before I ask Balbir to pick up a question, I have this question which is actually summing up many others have talked about food processing as a key focus area. Quite a few questions have come in that direction. But one of that is very categorically is aimed or asked to Umesh. Umesh, this is a question coming from Achyut Jagirdar. While a part of it you have spoken about, but that's something which many of them are keen to learn more from you. The question goes like this. We heard you talking about palletization, automation, loading dock, etc. Given the post-COVID situation, do you really see that all 3PLs, warehousing builders are ready for this kind of automation? Especially looking at the setup economics, don't you think government should more actively promote setting up automized warehouses at affordable rentals? Over to you, Umesh.
Thank you, Gulam. I think very good question. So warehousing actually is an outcome of what is your transportation design. So currently with such a kind of unorganized transport design where you have 720 dimensions of trucks available in India, I think it is not possible so easily to automate a lot of stuff. Our design helps us to automate a lot of stuff because we have a larger footprint relative to any other organization or FMCG company, because our main ingredient is water. So that's how we produce Coke. So we have a larger footprint and we have a larger radius of customers within close vicinity of that manufacturing footprint and warehouse, which is why we do a lot of dedicated trucks. We do a lot of stuff which is automated, and we can do a lot of customization, so to speak. Having said that, we are working with the government on standardization of truck norms, which is eventually to improve palletization in the country. We are doing collaboration with many other FMCG companies where we are trying to replicate this practice of palletization so that this becomes a common demand for transporters, and transporters realize to change the design of the whole country. And that's basically one of the endeavor which we are working closely with the government through many bodies, like I spoke about USIBC, CII, and also Chamber of Visionary Supply Chain Leaders, which I'm leading. So I think this is broadly what we are doing. Government should definitely help, and I think they are doing a lot already. So GST already helps us to break boundaries and do a lot of stuff, which is a good beginning right now. In these times, that will, I think, take a lot of more leverage because people would want to save a lot of cost due to the hit at the bottom line. So I think government is already doing at its own pace. The pace can improve, but I think the thought is very clear and they are in alignment.
Thank you so much, Umesh. That was a very, very elaborate but perfectly put up answer. It answers all the aspects that Achyut would have thought of learning from you. I would, and then I see a lot of questions coming in specifically for e-commerce, especially for Flipkart. Balbir, can I seek your intervention here? Can you pick up the right question and address it from that aspect, please? Please unmute yourself. Please unmute yourself. Paji, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, this question is to Satyam from a client, from a attendee, that do Flipkart and other e-commerce retailers look at any specific requirement while leasing and renting a warehouse? Do these companies prefer the standard warehouse format, or they look at a customized automation for their specific warehouse related to the needs of the company? And second question to Satyam is also regarding labor. How are you handling your labor issues currently in the current pandemic?
Sure. So let me address the labor section first. One of the foremost concerns for us at the moment is worker safety, right? And as one of our esteemed panelists also alluded a little earlier in the conversation, in the post-COVID norms, some of the standards that the industry had been operating with will have to evolve in response to that. Be it about the density of people, be it about number of interactions and so on and so forth, the contactless principle that, how do you get the work done without without exposing people to risk, so to speak. I think Umesh alluded to that, and that's where a lot of our current focus has been, because that's mostly about the first response. First response is, hey, how do you ensure safety part of it, and that's more or less for almost across all the modern organizations. That's almost first instinct, so to speak, nowadays. The second aspect, once we have gotten past addressing that, the second aspect then comes into that, how do we think about labor availability, labor productivity, and case for technology interventions with these changes in the mindset, right? So that's going to evolve a lot. I think this is going to make a lot more case for using more of the using more of the intellect, hiring more people for their intellect and problem solving capabilities rather than just the physical muscle, so to speak, right? And that trend will anyway have to accelerate if we need to improve overall logistics efficiency of the country as a whole, right? One of the major factors on which the logistics efficiency depends is that how many touches are there in the overall distribution supply chain. So that's one part of it. I see technology becoming more prevalent in terms of addressing worker safety, technology becoming more prevalent in terms of addressing productivity issues under the new norms as well. On the question of do we look for a standard box or a customized box? The characteristics of a bulk or a B2B warehousing to a B2C warehousing, right, where you get goods in bulk but you ship in eaches, are fundamentally different. If we take the simplest yardstick of a square feet to the number of docks, that itself is slightly different, and that essentially, as Umesh had alluded, it is just derived from the transportation characteristics, the downstream characteristics of how shipment will go out downstream into the supply chain. So there are certain customizations from the infrastructure perspective that we look for. Fortunately, these customizations are not e-commerce specific, but these customizations are for any business that looks at shipping out smaller parcels compared to the inbound. If the ratio is almost the same, it works for almost all those businesses. So the risk on landlord or the real estate owner in terms of investing in those customizations is lower. And that's key. Where it becomes a little tricky is the case for automation, right? Most usually automation has a little longer time horizon of payback, and you do automation for various reasons. You do it for service levels. When you're going to ship 40,000 shipments an hour from a facility, and every wrong shipment that you make is going to give you an angry call at your contact center, and which is expensive. The way you look at service levels is very different. Then also is driven by the productivity and the throughput potential part of it. But the ROI horizon also is pretty different, and that's where at least for the e-commerce players, it has become very obvious that their preference now is for the grade A warehousing alone, right? And grade A warehousing with certain tweaking on the parameters of the warehouse design that supports getting in bulk but distributing in eaches, part of it. Most of the operators, including the 3PL operators in the warehousing space that I have been discussing with, have more or less taken a point of view that they are willing to invest in automation if the real estate owners are not in a position to do so because of the considerations of time horizon and the lease considerations and so on and so forth. But another trend that I see is that the average lease size, if you look at the lease duration, if you look at, has been on the increasing side as well. So that also makes the case for automation.
Thank you so much. That was a very elaborate answer, and I'm sure that actually is presenting a lot of other questions that we had on the list that we have here. The next question I would love to, of course, it is specifically in that and ask for Mr. Jaggi to answer. So Rajesh, how do you see, and this is a slightly different question, but there are two such questions which are connected. One, and for whatever reason, this question, one is from some anonymous attendee. I don't know why do you want to keep your name out from the question that you are sending. But the other one is pretty elaborate and coming from Jyoti Anand. And both these questions are addressed to you, Rajesh. First of all, the narrow question was from the New Mumbai side of it. This questioner wants to understand, was the focus on the Navi Mumbai Taloja Panvel because of the airport coming up. But the other one, which is I'm sure slightly more macro question from Jyoti, is to you, Rajesh. Readiness of our modern infrastructure with dock leveler and scope of truck turnaround time, reduction by palletization. What's your view on these things? Over to you, Rajesh.
Yeah, sure. So just, quickly, the answer to both the questions is that I actually personally uh, find the area around Panvel, the new airport, very interesting. I think that there should be potential for future warehousing coming there. A couple of reasons. JNPT is quite close with the new airport coming and air cargo being the main purpose of the new airport. I do find a huge potential there. But for some reason, to be honest with you, I think a lot of the warehousing is focused on the Bhiwandi side right now, okay, because of the connectivity of the highway that is present. So I think that it is a matter of time where they do look at this location. As far as Taloja is concerned, it's predominantly been a industrial belt and continues to be that. But I think industrial and manufacturing has moved out of Bombay, to keep the city more, green, etc. And even labor costs are expensive. So that's moved to the Pune side actually. So I don't see too much action happening in Taloja from a manufacturing perspective. Your second question is on efficiencies. I'll just answer it generally. We do in grade A projects of ours, all of them are grade A. We do actually provide dock levelers. We are trying to actually get into gate management systems where the efficiencies of the trucks can be increased as far as docking and undocking of the products are concerned. However, I think my concern still goes out to the inherent supply chain industry as a whole, right? And the trucking industry as a whole, that whether they need to actually work on getting the efficiencies in, because it's not about just entering my park and exiting. It's also about, how efficiently they can enter, finish the work and leave the park. We actually find that once the unloading has happened at our park, the truck drivers wait for another couple of hours before they exit and they take a nap, right? So I'm saying these are the efficiencies that need to be created. However, what we have been doing is with our tenants, working with them to create efficiencies of loading and unloading to that extent, and ensure that can be sped up, because that's what costs them money, right? If they can actually deliver faster, it helps them. So we're working a lot with them to actually ensure that efficiencies do come in.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rajesh. And Mehul, one question, and in fact, many of them are asking this question, which is, and then of course, these are different locations. People are asking about Noida, people are asking about Rajasthan, Alwar, and a lot of these tier 2 locations. And one of them has specifically asked for you, someone called Akshay, wants to know what's your perception, what's your view about getting into these markets which are buzzing with activities, but then somehow it is still not finding takers from the warehousing sector. Over to you, Mehul.
Thank you. I mean, so one of the most favorite area is I always look at East is going to be the new North. Okay, so these are very, very important sectors for the growth. I mean, these are the growth sectors I would consider. I mean, starting from Guwahati, Siliguri, Patna, UP remains one of the most favorite location as a part of the study. Is the whole Kanpur, Lucknow, and Varanasi belt, Ghaziabad and Noida belt remains one of the most promising, interesting belt to watch out for. Alwar also, but I mean, Rajasthan traditionally has not been a very, very big manufacturing zone, basically. So I would look at UP and East is most promising from the growth perspective. As earlier I mentioned, my biggest issue is the push and pull. The pull is the capital partners. Now, whether the mandates from the capital partner allows you to start into these cities or not. There is an allocation of capital. Is it allowing us to venture into these cities or not? The day when that happens, probably the capital, still the international capital is still focused on looking at big 8 cities, I mean, which is like 65% of industrial as well as the consumption zone. So, I mean, over the next 5 years, if we are really able to, when the more and more we see vacancy in these big 8 cities, I guess the capital will start moving into the non-metro cities, I guess.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mehul. I have, in fact, a lot of questions, but I'm getting signals that our time is running out. We will take not more than one or two more questions. One question is actually coming specifically asking for Robert. Robert, this question is from Singram Sittarasi. I hope I got his name right, Sittarasu. I'm so sorry. This question is to you, Robert. Good to note your words for Mihan, perhaps one of the successful projects for government of Maharashtra in terms of employment, investment, etc. But the question is trying to ask your perspective. What's your learning? What do you think there is more? Where is it that the governments can do more to attract investors like you into India? Over to you, Rob.
That's a great question. Thanks for asking this question. Look, the bottom line is, there was somebody else discussing a couple of minutes back that why, what is the, I think it was Dr. Hiranandani, like why Vietnam, why not India? We've been dealing with Vietnam for a while. Everything just boils down to governance and ease of doing business. So if, as long as land titles are not, they are not an issue, we don't have to go through hundreds of documents to verify a simple title. That everything just adds up, so ease of doing business is super essential when it comes to, people. I've got many friends over here, even funds. We deal with a lot of funds from Hong Kong, Singapore, US as well. And they're all having a very positive outlook towards India. But the question is, can we just streamline some of the issues which are on the ground in India? Because no one wants to come and get stuck. So that something is, someone has, that has to be addressed. But, and then there was some other, couple of minutes back, there was someone raising, that maybe they can be a governing body for warehousing. I would just suggest that being a person of Indian origin, I've got a very soft corner for India. I'm really proud of, my origins and my country. And I really want the country to start doing well. So I would just suggest that, look, if the government can come up with a department like, you have the election commissions, which is non-biased, no political interference can take place with election commissions. I would just suggest that there should be an infrastructure commission where no political party can actually influence any of the decision taken by this infrastructure commission. So long story short, I think what's super important is the decision makers coming up with right policy, people who are educated, people who are well-versed with logistics, people who are well-versed with, how businesses can start doing well. We don't require, politicians, who that may not be their expertise, but we require experts from universities and experts from business communities like Dr. Hiranandani, Mr. Shetty. They are the ones who understand what needs to be done. They are the ones who understand the best practices and how things can be put together in a reasonable way and get things done. So I think it's super important for the governance to be right, for policy decisions to be correct. There's ample amount of capital floating around, which is absolutely keen to look at India, given the population size, very intelligent people, a great market. You look at what's happening with Jio. Jio has actually made the 4G spread like never before. The valuation of Jio has gone through the roof. The next revolution is going to be 5G, which is again going to be a massive, uplift for online shoppers, which will then affect the warehousing as well. I've got one of our, we were one of the underbidders. There's something happening with Amazon in Sydney. They have recently announced a massive fulfillment center in Sydney, about 200,000 square feet of space. That'll be one of the most automated space in fulfillment center in Australia. So things are happening. Companies like Flipkart and Amazon, I'm sure Flipkart as well, but Amazon is looking at same day delivery. You order the product in the morning, you get the delivery by afternoon. And that's where, we are really keen to look into this space. We are also looking at the vertical warehousing. vertical warehousing on the city, periphery of, cities like Mumbai, or even, and that trend is prevalent in, cities like Singapore, Tokyo, where vertical warehousing is taking place. So I think digitization, AI, 4G and 5G, that is all going to transform the industry in a very big way. And, it's the way to go. Data centers, fulfillment centers, this is where, the trend is, and this is where things will be heading. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to policymakers. Please make things easier for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Robert. That was a pretty elaborate answer. In fact, we are just about running out of time. Just one last question, and this is, of course, a lot of such questions have come for pharma industry. But if I can invite Sriram to take this question, Vaibhav from Takeda Pharma has this question coming in. For cold chain pharma, what will be the strategy for end-to-end movements of stocks as per turnaround time? So can we take that question? Over to Sriram, please.
Sure. I think the challenge of cold chain, and India has a lot that we can learn from the experience in other markets, be it across APAC or elsewhere in the world where infrastructure is a lot more developed. Cold chains are mature. It's not just pharma, but there are multiple other categories. Usually it's driven by food. Dairy, for example, is one of the industries that I've been associated with earlier, where because of the challenges on shelf life, microbial integrity, etc., having a cold chain that is high on integrity, a cold chain where controls remain consistent and reliable on a 24/7 basis, not just from the farm to the factory, but also right through to the end consumer in the case of dairy. And likewise, when you have the pharmaceutical industry, right from where your APIs and key starting materials originate, which could be across the global supply chain, it may not even be in the local market, through to manufacturing, and then right through to the patient. I think infrastructure upgradation and maturity is probably going to be the single biggest determinant of how effective we are, and therefore what is the share of that category of medicines and healthcare that we can partake of, not just as a country, but also within that, as an organization. I think bringing it down to the warehousing and logistics space, it goes back to one of the points that I mentioned earlier, the importance of compliance and adherence to quality. I think that is going to be the single biggest area that warehousing service providers must really focus on. There is a clear shift and a lack of willingness to compromise on some of these elements of our operation, which are truly essential and non-negotiable in a sense. Therefore, integrity in terms of our commitment to adherence, infrastructure that actually allows us to set up the right kind of facilities. I'll tell you, it may sound very, very simple, but one of the biggest factors when it comes to our ability to reach patients across the entire length and breadth of India is going to be the reliable availability of electricity. Power supply, which is such a critical component of core infrastructure, you just cannot have an integral cold chain that functions on a 24/7 basis and keeps your product secure if you don't have power supply to be able to run your cold chain. And when you look at the length and breadth of the warehousing space across the value chain, it may be easier for you to have backup generators in a consolidated warehousing location that is closer to your manufacturing plant. But what do you really do when you are close to the patient in some remote corner of the country where power supply is a problem and you still have to store your medicines with the same quality and with the same levels of compliance? I think this is probably going to be the single biggest enabler or otherwise of our ability to expand, build, as well as mature from a cold chain integrity standpoint.
Thank you so much, Sriram. Thank you so much. And I can tell you, we are in a soup. We are in a fix because there are more than 104 questions still on my list. And we are completely out of time. In fact, we have overshot it, almost about 45 minutes dedicated to question and answers. I'm sure the participants are extremely excited to engage with all of you personally. So I'm sure the organizers, the Reed and Akshita will do the needful to pass on the questions across to all of you over a period of time for your answers, because most of them want to be in touch individually with you all, but time is not on our side. So thank you so much, all the panelists, for very patiently answering all these questions, and my apologies to Tim as well. While there are lots of questions, but I couldn't hurl even one at you because of, we are running out of time. So with that, I will conclude this question answer session and pass it back to Shishir. Thank you so much to all the participants for sending these questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ghulam, Balbir, and thank you for all the attendees for this questions. I would just like to thank all the panelists and everyone who attended this for the webinar for a fabulous enlightening session. And I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I hope you all did. With this, I'll hand it back to Akshita, and I look forward to meeting all of you again. All the questions that were left unanswered, it is our promise that we will get back to you as soon as possible with the relevant answers. And thank you, Rajni, for the presentation. Over to you, Akshita. Thank you.
Thank you, Shishir. I would also like to thank you for sharing such great insights and for letting us know. We are going to put in a poll right now. So please let us know how was the webinar. We would love to have a feedback from all of you. The questions that have not been answered in the Q&A, we'll be taking them offline. And I would like to personally thank Knight Frank for partnering with us today for this webinar, and for the team Knight Frank for helping us sharing all the details. You would all be getting an email to download the link for the India Warehousing Market Report 2020. Until then, thank you everyone for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.